A Thursday morning in early autumn, Seattle draped in the kind of drizzle that doesn't fall so much as hover, suspended between sky and pavement, like the city itself can't decide whether to commit to the storm. The leaves on Fifth Avenue were wet and copper bright, plastered against the sidewalk in shapes that looked deliberate, almost artistic, the way ruin sometimes does. Evelyn Carter had not slept well. She hadn't slept well in 11 days. To be precise, not since the board's emergency session, not since the whisper campaign about Aurora Systems began circulating in the financial press, not since someone inside her own company had started making moves she couldn't trace. She was 41 years old, the youngest CEO in Aurora's history, and she had built her career on the belief that every problem had a logical architecture. Every breakdown had a root. Every failure was readable, if you knew how to look. She was currently looking at a laptop screen that displayed nothing but a solid black rectangle. "It was fine 30 seconds ago," said her assistant, a young woman named Petra Walsh, who had the particular expression of someone who has already apologized twice and is dreading the third time. 30 seconds ago was 30 seconds ago, Evelyn said. She pressed the power button. Nothing. She held it. Nothing. In the glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor of Aurora's headquarters tower, 9 people sat waiting 2 venture partners from Meridian Capital, a delegation from a potential enterprise client in Phoenix, Evelyn's COO, her legal counsel, and a communications director who kept glancing at his watch with the barely concealed panic of a man calculating how long a meeting can be delayed before it becomes an incident. The laptop held the entire presentation. 3 months of competitive analysis, 14 slides of financial modeling, the deck that was supposed to close a $40 million partnership before lunch. The IT department was, at that moment, 2 floors down, dealing with a server anomaly that had triggered at 6 a.m. The technician on call had not yet been reached. The backup laptop was in the car of Evelyn's deputy, who was stuck on I-5 rain-related gridlock. "Does anyone have?" Evelyn began. "I can try." The voice came from the hallway. Evelyn looked up. Standing just outside the glass wall, holding a wheeled mop bucket and wearing the navy blue uniform of the building's facilities crew, was a man who appeared to be somewhere in his mid-30s. He was lean, with the kind of quiet stillness in his posture that you saw in people who had learned not to take up more space than they needed. His hair was dark and slightly damp from the rain or the work. It was impossible to tell. His badge read, D. Hayes Facilities, Aurora Systems. He was looking not at Evelyn, but at the laptop. "The screen," he said. "That patterned solid black after the logo screen. That's usually a kernel panic, not hardware. Software." Someone in the conference room made a sound that was technically a laugh. Marcus Doyle, Aurora's chief technology officer, was sitting at the far end of the table with his arms crossed. He was 44, wore shirts that cost $400 and looked effortless, and had the specific brand of confidence that comes from being told you're brilliant so many times you've stopped needing the reminder. He said nothing, but the slight elevation of one eyebrow said everything. Evelyn looked at the man in the doorway. Then she looked at her blank laptop. Then at the 9 people waiting. "Come in," she said. He left the mop bucket in the hallway. He moved to the laptop without ceremony, without explanation, without asking permission. He turned it over, examined the underside, turned it back, and pressed a combination of keys that Evelyn did not recognize. He waited 4 seconds. The screen flickered. The logo appeared. The desktop loaded. He stepped back. "Corrupted system extension," he said. "Safe mode bypass. It'll hold for today, but your IT team should run a full diagnostic." The room was quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when they're recalibrating. Evelyn looked at the laptop. She looked at the man. "Thank you," she said, and her voice carried the flat precision of someone who is genuinely surprised but has spent 20 years training their face not to show it. He nodded once, turned, and walked back to his mop bucket. The meeting started 6 minutes late. It went well, but Evelyn Carter spent the next 40 minutes thinking about the way he had said kernel panic, not like someone who had once heard the term, like someone who had diagnosed it 100 times. The meeting ended at 11:47. The Meridian partners shook hands with the Phoenix delegation. Evelyn signed a letter of intent. The communications director exhaled for the first time in 2 hours. Petra collected the materials with the practiced efficiency of someone who has already moved on to the next task. Evelyn took the longer route back to her office. She told herself it was because she wanted to walk past the east side windows, where on clear days you could see the water. But the sky was the color of wet concrete, and there was no view, and she knew that wasn't the real reason. She was looking for the man with the mop bucket. She found him, or rather found his laptop, before she found him. He had set up a small workstation of sorts in the alcove near the service elevator on the 31st floor, just a folding metal shelf, the kind the facilities crew used for supply staging, with a battered laptop propped open on it. He himself was around the corner, cleaning the baseboards of the corridor. She could hear the quiet rhythm of his work. She stopped. On the laptop screen, a machine that was clearly personal, clearly old. Running on battery power because there was no cord, there was a diagram. It took Evelyn a moment to process what she was seeing. Because the diagram was not simple. It was a tiered network architecture map, rendered in what appeared to be custom visualization software, with color-coded layers that she recognized even from a distance, even at an angle, as representing the kind of segmented security infrastructure that large enterprise systems use to isolate critical data clusters. There were annotations, dense ones. In a notation system she had only seen used by people with serious formal training. There were also, in a separate window on the taskbar, what appeared to be fragments of code, not scripts, not macros, architecture-level code, the kind that defined how systems talk to each other at the foundation layer. She did not touch the laptop. She stood in the hallway for approximately 7 seconds, which felt much longer, and then she walked back toward her office without looking behind her. At her desk, she opened a new document and typed a single name, D. Hayes Facilities. Then she picked up her phone and called HR. The alarm on Daniel Hayes's phone was set for 6:14, not 6:15, because 6:15 was when Lily's alarm went off, and he had learned through 3 years of careful iteration that he needed exactly 1 minute of preparation before the morning began in earnest. In that 1 minute, he lay still and listened to the apartment. The building was a converted warehouse near the waterfront in Tacoma, and in October the wind came off the sound and pressed against the windows like something trying to get inside. He could hear the refrigerator hum. He could hear, distantly, the first traffic of the day on Pacific Avenue. He could hear nothing from the room across the hall, which meant Lily was still asleep, which meant the next 60 seconds were his. He used them to think about nothing in particular. Then Lily's alarm went off, a sound like a small, cheerful emergency, and the apartment shifted into motion. She was 8 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and his tendency to ask questions that required more thought than the asker probably intended. This morning she wanted to know, while eating cereal, whether fish experienced time differently than humans. Some scientists think they might, Daniel said. He was making her lunch. Their brains process sensory information faster, so a second might feel longer to them. So a fish is always living in slow motion? Sort of. More like a fish experiences each second more fully than we do. Lily considered this while eating. That sounds exhausting, she said. Or beautiful, Daniel said. Depending on how you look at it. He drove her to school in a 2011 Honda that needed new wiper blades. He'd ordered them. They hadn't arrived yet, and watched the smeared arcs across the windshield in the rain, with the mild patience of someone who has learned to accept the things that cannot immediately be fixed. The drive from their apartment to Lily's school took 11 minutes in light traffic, 14 in rain. He knew this the way he knew most things about their routine, not from memorization but from repetition. the way a river knows its bed. The radio was set to a classical station that Lily had chosen one morning 6 months ago, and that they had never changed. Neither of them had ever mentioned keeping it. They had simply kept it, the way families accumulate small agreements that are never formally made. "Dad," Lily said, approximately 4 minutes into the drive, in the tone of someone who has been thinking about something since breakfast. "If a fish has more seconds than we do, does that mean a fish that lives for 1 year actually lives longer than we think it does?" "In subjective terms, maybe," Daniel said. "In absolute time, a year is still a year. But what the fish does with each second, how much information it processes, how many moments it experiences that might be richer. So time is different depending on who you are. Time is the same. Experience is different." She thought about this. He watched the wipers arc back and forth. "Is that why grown-ups always say years go by fast?" she asked. "Because they're not experiencing each second as much?" He didn't answer right away. He let the silence hold for a moment the sound of the wipers, the radio murmuring something by Debussy, the particular gray-green of October trees through a rain-blurred window. "Probably," he said, finally. "When you're young, everything is new. New things take more attention. More attention means you remember more. More memories makes time feel longer when you look back. So I should stay surprised by things so I don't lose time. That's one way to put it." She nodded seriously, as if this were a decision she was filing away. He pulled up to the school gate. The usual small crowd of parents and kids, umbrellas and backpacks, the mid-morning energy of children who have already outpaced the adults around them. At the school gate, she turned back once, the way she always did. "See you at pickup?" she asked. "6, he said. "I'll be there." She nodded, satisfied, and disappeared through the gate. He sat in the parking lot for 2 minutes after she was gone. He did this every morning. He wasn't sure why. It felt, in some way he had never fully articulated, like making sure she was safely received, like watching a package get delivered to the right hands. In his wallet, folded behind his license, was a photograph. He didn't look at it every day. But some mornings, when the rain was this particular shade of gray and the light through the windshield was soft and diffuse and reminded him of the kitchen of their old house in Wallingford, he would take it out and look at it for a few seconds. A woman at a kitchen table, mid-laugh, holding a mug in both hands. The light from the window behind her made a halo out of her hair. Claire, 4 years ago. The kitchen table was gone. The house was gone. She was gone, but Lily had her laugh. The exact same shape, the exact same catch at the end, like laughter surprised at itself. Daniel put the photograph back. He started the car. He had a 7:30 shift. The file was thin. Daniel Joseph Hayes, 37 years old. Hired 14 months ago as a Level 2 facilities technician at Aurora Systems headquarters building. Employment record. Clean. Attendance. Nearly perfect. Performance reviews. Reliable, thorough, unobtrusive. No disciplinary notes. No complaints. Prior employment. A 3-year gap marked simply as personal leave. Before that gap, the file ended. It ended because Daniel Hayes had requested, upon hire, that his prior employment history remain off his official record, a request that was not unusual in cases of personal hardship, and had been granted by an HR manager who had since left the company. Evelyn read this and set down the file. She called Nathaniel Ford, her head of corporate security, a former FBI analyst who had joined Aurora 3 years ago and who had the specific, unhurried competence of someone who had seen enough genuine crises to remain calm during small ones. "I need you to run a background check," she said. "Full spectrum. Prior employment, everything. Name? Daniel Hayes. Facilities staff." There was a short pause on the line. "That's an interesting name," Nathaniel said. "You know it. Give me 2 hours," he said. "And don't let him leave the building." The alert came at 2:23 p.m. It appeared simultaneously on 6 screens in Aurora's Network Operations Center, a room on the 14th floor that most of the company didn't know existed, staffed by a rotating team of 4 analysts and overseen, ultimately, by Marcus Doyle. The alert was Level 3, which was the second highest severity tier, and it indicated anomalous outbound data transfer from a production server cluster. Within 8 minutes, Marcus had escalated it to Level 4. Within 12 minutes, Level 4 had escalated itself. The data wasn't just moving, it was being extracted, systematically, in packets small enough to avoid triggering the primary threshold filters, which meant whoever was doing this had studied Aurora's detection architecture carefully enough to know where the gaps were. "Lock the external ports," Marcus said. He was standing behind 2 of his analysts, both of whom were typing rapidly. The room smelled like cold air and coffee. "We lock external, we also lock our own outbound," said one of the analysts, a young woman named Stephanie, who had the look of someone who had been awake since yesterday and had made peace with it. "Then find another way." "Where's it going?" "Multiple endpoints. Distributed. Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe. 1 domestic node. Classic multi-hop obfuscation. Trace the domestic node. Working on it." Marcus's phone was ringing. He ignored it. He looked at the maps on the central display, the network topology of Aurora's infrastructure, lit up with red markers like a patient in the middle of a diagnosis, and felt the specific cold clarity of a professional confronted with a problem larger than he had anticipated. He had been building this security architecture for 3 years. He had consulted with some of the best minds in the field. He had overseen 2 independent audits, and someone was inside it. Evelyn arrived at 2:41. She entered the operations center with Nathaniel at her shoulder and took the room in with a single, long look. Marcus gave her the summary in 40 seconds. She listened without interrupting. "What's the attack vector?" "Unknown. No obvious entry point. Either a very sophisticated external breach or someone inside helped," Nathaniel finished. The room went very quiet. Daniel Hayes was mopping the corridor outside the Network Operations Center when the second alert went out. He knew it was a second alert because the first one, the quiet vibration of the building's internal alert system, designed to notify key personnel, had happened 37 minutes ago, and in the time since, he had watched 4 people walk past him with the particular speed and expression of people containing a controlled emergency. He also knew because he could see, through the small, reinforced glass window in the operations center door, the edge of the central display. He had designed that display. He had designed the architecture it was showing. He had, 10 years ago, written the threat detection protocols that were now being triggered. One after another, like a row of dominoes laid out by someone who had studied the pattern and knew exactly where to push. He stopped mopping. He looked at the window for a long moment. Then he looked at the mop in his hand, at the bucket, at the reflection of himself in the polished floor, the Navy uniform, the building badge, the version of himself he had chosen after Claire died, because it was the version of himself that came home at 6 o'clock and had no emergency calls and could sit on the floor with Lily and read to her without half his brain somewhere else. He picked up the mop. He kept working. He was almost at the end of the corridor when Evelyn Carter opened the operations center door and said, "Mr. Hayes." He stopped. She was standing in the doorway with her arms at her sides, and her expression was the specific expression of a person who has just decided to make a bet they're not entirely sure about. "We have a problem," she said. "I know," he said. A pause. "Come inside," she said. He leaned the mop against the wall. He went inside. The operations center was colder than the hallway. Daniel stood near the door for a moment, taking in the space, the analysts, the displays, the network maps. He looked at the topology diagram on the main screen. He looked at the alert indicators. He looked at the timeline of events in the upper right corner. Marcus Doyle turned from the central console and looked at him the way people look at things that have appeared in the wrong context. A wild animal in a parking lot. A child at a board meeting. "I'm not sure what the plan is here," Marcus said. He directed this at Evelyn, not at Daniel. "The plan," Evelyn said, "is that you have been working on this for 40 minutes and the exfiltration is still active. We're close. They're using a reverse tunnel through your monitoring layer," Daniel said. Not loudly, not aggressively. "The way a person states a fact about the weather." Marcus turned. "I'm sorry? The outbound traffic you're seeing isn't the actual exfiltration. It's a decoy. The real data movement is going through your own monitoring traffic reverse-tunneled inside your own telemetry stream. You're seeing it as internal system noise. Your filters aren't catching it because your filters were tuned to look for external anomalies, and this looks like internal communication." The room was very quiet. Stephanie, the analyst who had been awake since yesterday, turned slowly to look at the telemetry panel. "Pull up the monitoring traffic volume for the last 3 hours," Daniel said to her. She looked at Marcus. Marcus said nothing. She pulled it up. There it was. A slight, very slight, almost imperceptible elevation in monitoring traffic. Not enough to trigger an alert. Steady, rhythmic, patient. "That's the carrier," Daniel said. "Someone piggybacked the exfiltration on your own heartbeat signals. They're riding out on the one channel you don't monitor, because monitoring the monitor creates a loop," Stephanie said, very quietly. "Oh my God." Marcus was looking at the screen. His arms were no longer crossed. Daniel sat down at one of the analyst consoles. He asked for access. Evelyn authorized it. Nathaniel stood behind him, watching. He worked the way people work when they are not performing the work quickly, without commentary, following a logic that was entirely internal. He opened a terminal window. He ran a series of commands that were not in any standard playbook, because he had written them himself a decade ago for exactly this class of problem. The analysts watched him. Not ostentatiously, they were still working their own consoles, still monitoring the active alerts, still running their own traces. But the quality of their attention had changed. It was the difference between a room of people who are doing a job and a room of people who are watching someone do something they have never seen done quite this way before. Daniel did not notice, or if he noticed, did not acknowledge. He worked through the layers of the problem with the economy of someone who has solved variations of it before moving quickly through the diagnostic phase, skipping the checks that he already knew the answers to, focusing his attention on the specific junctions where the anomaly would be most visible if you knew what you were looking for. His hands on the keyboard had a particular rhythm. Not fast, exactly precise, each keystroke intentional. Stephanie, who had spent 4 years as a security analyst and had attended 2 specialized training programs and 1 conference in Las Vegas, where a man in a black turtleneck had talked for 3 hours about advanced, persistent threats, was watching Daniel's terminal output with the specific expression of a student who has just realized they are in the presence of a different category of teacher. Marcus Doyle, standing behind and slightly to the left, was watching with a different expression, the kind that forms on the face of a person who is very good at something, has spent years being told they are the best in the room, and is currently watching someone do their thing better. He did not say anything. He watched. "I'm building a shadow monitor," Daniel said, "not for the room, but to give the analysts something to follow, a separate channel that watches the monitoring traffic itself. If the exfiltration is riding the heartbeat stream, we should be able to see the parasitic signal by looking at packet timing irregularities. The timing won't be perfectly synchronized. There's always a micro delay when data is being piggybacked. The legitimate heartbeat signals will be machine regular. The exfiltration will have a slight stutter." "How slight?" Stephanie asked. "Microseconds. Not something your current logging would catch. But a shadow monitor tuned specifically for timing variance will see it. That'll take hours to build from scratch," Marcus said. "I have the architecture saved," Daniel said. He typed a directory path. He opened a file. It was there, the framework, stored in a compressed archive, from a time when he had built this system and had the foresight to leave himself a spare key. Marcus stared at the screen. "That file was created 10 years ago," he said slowly. "Yes," Daniel said. He kept typing. The shadow monitor came online in 11 minutes. The parasitic signal was visible immediately, a heartbeat within the heartbeat, perfectly synchronized to look like noise, perfectly timed to be invisible. It was elegant, it was patient, it was the work of someone who understood Aurora's architecture from the inside. "We're not just going to block it," Daniel said. "If we block it, whoever is running this knows we found it. They'll destroy evidence and we'll never know how they got in." "So what do we do?" Stephanie asked. "We give them a room," Daniel said. "A room with no exits." He built a honeypot. Not the standard variety, not a decoy server that simply mimicked real data and waited for someone to walk in. This was something more specific. A constructed network segment that looked, from the inside of the parasitic tunnel, like the most valuable data cluster Aurora had. Financial architecture, acquisition records, board-level strategic documents, all of it fabricated. All of it perfectly plausible. All of it wired with logging tripwires so sensitive they could detect the difference between a human keystroke rhythm and an automated scan. The fabricated data was the part that required the most care. It couldn't look too perfect. Real data had errors, inconsistencies, the accumulated imprecision of human beings entering information over years. So, Daniel seeded it with the right kind of noise. An outdated fiscal projection that had been superseded but never deleted. A duplicated entry in a personnel record, a folder name that didn't quite match the convention used in the rest of the directory. Real mess. Convincing mess. "You're building furniture for an empty room," Nathaniel said, watching. "I'm making the room look lived in," Daniel said. He was building two things simultaneously. The content that would attract attention, and the infrastructure that would record everything an intruder touched with the kind of granularity that could be presented in a legal proceeding. Not just what files were accessed, but how the order, the speed, the path through the directory, the specific search queries run against the fabricated data. Behavioral forensics, a portrait of the mind behind the intrusion. "Every move they make in there tells us something," Daniel said. "What they're looking for tells us who sent them. How they move tells us how they got in. Whether they hesitate tells us whether they've been here before. And when they send it out," he pointed to a final line of code, "we trace it back." "You can do that?" Trace a multi-hop chain? Not all the way, but far enough to find a domestic node. And a domestic node, in a breach that originated from inside the building, will be close enough. Close enough for what? Daniel looked up from the screen for the first time in 20 minutes. "For Nathaniel to do the rest," he said. Nathaniel, standing behind them, said nothing. But something in his posture shifted the small, almost imperceptible adjustment of a person accepting a responsibility. The trap went live at 3:51 p.m. For 8 minutes, nothing happened. Then the parasitic signal shifted. Whoever was on the other end had noticed the new data cluster not immediately, but inevitably, the way a current pulls at anything in the water. They moved toward it. They entered the honeypot at 3:59. Daniel watched the log panel. The attacker moved through the fabricated data with confidence. They knew what they were looking for. They navigated directly to the financial architecture folder without exploring the surrounding structure, which meant they had been here before or had been told exactly where to go. "They're not fishing," Daniel said quietly. "They know the layout. Someone gave them a map." Marcus, who had been standing behind Daniel for the past 40 minutes without speaking, said, "The layout of our internal file architecture? That's not public. That's not even documented in a single place." "I know," Daniel said. He kept watching the log. At 4:04, the attacker made their extraction attempt, tried to pull the fabricated data out through the parasitic channel. Daniel closed the channel, not shut it down. Closed it, sealed it from the inside, locked the attacker in the honeypot like a door swinging shut behind someone who has just stepped into a room they didn't realize was a room. "They're trapped?" Stephanie asked. "They're visible," Daniel said. "Which is better?" He ran the trace. The multi-hop chain peeled back like an onion, first the Eastern European relay, then the domestic node, then the internal network address, an IP, a workstation, a location within the building, floor 22, an office in the software architecture division. Nathaniel took 2 members of Aurora's internal security team. They went quietly, which was the right way to go, no announcement over comms, no visible escalation, nothing that would trigger the kind of alert that someone monitoring their own access would notice. They took the south stairwell to avoid the main corridor, and they went quickly but without running, the way people move when they are trying to look like they are not moving urgently. The man they found on floor 22 was named Gregory Fitch. He was a senior software architect, 39 years old. 11 years at Aurora. He had been in the room across the hall from Evelyn's during last year's strategy off-site. He had attended the company's 10th anniversary dinner. He had given a presentation at the previous year's Internal Technology Summit that had received a standing ovation from the engineering division. His daughter played soccer in Bellevue on Saturday mornings. His wife had left a birthday card on his desk last month, visible through his glass office wall, decorated with hand-drawn balloons. He was sitting at his desk when Nathaniel opened the door. He looked up. His face went through several expressions, very quickly surprise, then something that might have been the reflex toward denial, and then, almost immediately, a kind of collapse. Not physical. The collapse of the posture a person maintains when they are carrying something heavy and have been carrying it long enough that they have stopped noticing the weight. The moment when they set it down, "Mr. Fitch," Nathaniel said. "I know," Gregory Fitch said. Before Nathaniel said anything else, before the security team behind him took another step, his voice was flat and very tired. "I know." He did not reach for his phone. He did not try to close his laptop. He sat with his hands flat on the desk and looked at Nathaniel with the expression of someone who has been expecting a particular knock on a particular door for a very long time. Later, much later, after the legal process had run its course, the investigation would determine that Gregory Fitch had made his first contact with Aurora's competitor 18 months ago at an industry conference in San Francisco. It had started as a conversation, an innocent one, by all appearances. A drink at the hotel bar, a discussion about the direction of enterprise security, the kind of talk that circulates constantly in the industry. The competitor's representative had listened well. He had asked the right questions. He had, over the course of 3 more conversations across 2 continents, made Gregory Fitch feel seen in a way that his 11 years at Aurora had not managed to make him feel. And then, carefully and gradually and with great patience, he had made him an offer. $200,000, in the end, transferred in tranches to an account in a 3rd country, for the infrastructure documentation that Gregory had helped to maintain for a decade and which, as a senior architect with broad system access, he had been able to access without raising automated flags. It had probably seemed manageable. At the start, it probably seemed, at some point in those 18 months, like something that could simply stop, like a thing that could be quietly concluded. Nathaniel found the secondary laptop in the bottom drawer of his desk. He found the encrypted email thread. He found the payment records. Gregory Fitch was escorted out at 4:31 p.m. through the south exit, the one that faced the parking structure and not the street. In the operations center, the main display showed green across every alert indicator, one after another, like lights going on in a building at night. Stephanie put her head down on the console and breathed. Marcus Doyle stood in the center of the room and did not move for a long time. He was looking at the architecture diagram on the main display, the one Daniel had referenced, the one that formed the backbone of the security infrastructure. He was looking at it the way you look at something when you are understanding, for the first time, the full scope of what it is. At 4:47, after the alerts had cleared and legal had been called and the physical evidence had been secured, and after Nathaniel had made 3 phone calls and Marcus had made 2, and Stephanie had made 0 because she had stepped outside and was standing on the fire escape in the October rain without her jacket, Evelyn found Daniel in the hallway. He had his mop. He had gone back to the mop while the legal team was arriving. No one had told him to. He had simply, without announcement, returned to the hallway and resumed what he had been doing. Evelyn stood watching him for a moment. "Mr. Hayes," she said. He looked up. "Will you come to my office?" she asked. "Please?" He looked at the mop. He looked at the hallway. He looked at the time on his watch. She could see him doing the calculation. Something in his expression shifted, very slightly, and she thought it might be the calculation landing at a number he didn't like. "I have 20 minutes, he said. "That's enough," she said. Evelyn's office was on the 33rd floor. It had 2 large windows that on clear days would have shown the water. Today they showed gray and rain. She poured 2 cups of coffee without asking. She set one in front of him. He sat across from her desk and held the coffee cup with both hands, not drinking, just holding, the way people hold warm things when they're cold. He looked at the window. He looked at the rain. He looked at the desk, her desk, organized with the specific, functional sparseness of someone who thinks through action rather than accumulation, and at the single photograph on the shelf behind her, which he noticed but did not comment on. "Nathaniel ran a check on you," she said. He said nothing. "You worked here before," she said. "Not as facilities. You were here when the building was on the 7th floor on Pike Street. You were 32-year-old Daniel Hayes, and you were the chief security architect of Aurora Systems, and you designed the foundation layer of everything this company's infrastructure is built on." The rain pressed against the windows. "You designed the threat detection protocols that fired today," she said. "You designed the monitoring architecture. You designed the network topology I've been looking at on the main display for 3 years without knowing who built it. The document that Nathaniel pulled, the original architecture spec, it has your name on every section. I had good teammates," he said. "You had good teammates, and you were their architect." She paused. "I've been running this company for 3 years, and I was briefed on the system's history, and your name never came up once." "Not once. Do you know why?" He waited. "Because everyone who knew you had either left or had been there so long they assumed everyone else knew. Your name was just part of the foundation. Foundational things don't usually get named. They just hold up everything above them." He looked at his coffee cup. "You left in the spring of the year after you designed it. April. Your access was revoked voluntarily. You put in for personal leave, and you never came back." She paused. "Nathaniel found the records. Your wife died in February of that year." Something moved across Daniel's face. It was not grief, not the acute kind, anyway. It was the specific expression of someone touching a scar that no longer hurts as it once did, but doesn't quite feel like normal skin either. "Claire," he said. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said. "She'd been sick for 2 years," he said. "We knew it was coming." It doesn't actually make it smaller." "I don't know why people think it does." "I don't think it does," Evelyn said. He looked at her. A short, assessing look, the kind people give when they're checking whether the thing that was said was genuine, not compassionate professional, not the practiced empathy of a manager trained to handle difficult conversations. He was checking whether she meant it the way a person means something, not the way a position means something. He seemed to decide it was. "Lily was 4, he said. "After Claire died, I had a 4-year-old who was afraid of the dark, and I had a job that meant I left at 7 in the morning and came back at 9 at night, if I was lucky. I had a job where my phone rang at 2 a.m., and I had to pick up, and I had a job where the thing in the room always had to be the crisis, not the child." He set down the coffee cup. "I had a choice to make. You chose her," Evelyn said. "I chose her," he said. And his voice, for the first time, had something in it that was not calm, not distress, more like the specific quality of certainty, the sound of a person who has made a decision that cost them something real and has never regretted it. "I found the facilities work because it was nights and weekends, and no one calls you at 2 a.m. because the mop is having a crisis. I found this building because I knew the building. I know where everything is, It made the job easier. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "You've been watching the system," she said. It was not quite an accusation. "Not watching," he said. "Aware. The way you're aware of a structure you built. When something is wrong with a building you designed, you feel it differently than a stranger would. I've noticed things. Irregularities in the network traffic. Once, about 6 months ago, I wrote a note and slid it under the IT department's door. Was anything done about it? I don't know. Probably not, since it got worse. But that's not." He paused. "That's not why I'm here. I'm not here to watch over the system. I'm here because the work is quiet and it ends at the end of the shift." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. She had built her career on reading people, on knowing, within the first minutes of a conversation, what someone wanted, what they feared, what they were performing. She had sat across from venture capitalists who had 12 seconds of patience and needed to believe they were making the most important decision of the quarter. She had sat across from competitors who were pretending to be partners. She had sat across from people who were brilliant and knew it, and people who were brilliant and didn't know it, and people who were not very brilliant, but had learned to perform brilliance well enough to make it work. She was looking at a man who was not performing anything. The stillness in him was not a tactic. It was a state. He had found a way to be in the world that worked for him and for his daughter, and it fit him the way old, comfortable things fit, not because it was the best option, but because it was the right one. There was no gap between the man and the life, no performance of the man he might have been. It was, she realized, a genuinely rare thing to see. "I want to offer you your position back," she said. "Chief Security Architect. Your original compensation, adjusted for current rates, stock options, remote work the majority of the time if that helps. You could name your conditions." He looked at his watch. "I need to leave," he said. "I pick up Lily at 6. "I know, 5 minutes." He was quiet. He looked at the window. At the rain. "When I had this job," he said, "there was a week Lily was 7 months old, and there was a breach that required 3 days straight in the operations center. I called Claire every few hours. She told me Lily had started to smile. The real smiles, not the reflex ones. I wasn't there to see the first one. I was here." He said it without anger. That was what made it land. Anger would have given the room somewhere to go, some defensiveness to meet, some apology to offer. He didn't say it angrily. He said it the way you state a fact about the weather. A thing that happened. A thing that is simply and permanently and irrevocably true. "I was here," he said again. "And now she's 8, and she tells me about fish and how they experience time, and I drive her to school in the rain, and I'm there every morning and every evening. I know what her nightmares are about. I know what makes her laugh. I know the name of every kid in her class." He paused. "I lost a year of Claire. I missed things I will never get back. I won't do that again." Evelyn said nothing. The rain made soft, irregular sounds against the glass. "I can give you 2 things," he said. "I'll write you a full threat assessment, everything I noticed today, everything I've noticed over the past year, every structural vulnerability in the current architecture. It'll take me a few nights, but I'll write it. And I'll give you a list of names. People I'd trust to do the work right. People who won't cut corners on the fundamentals. That's not the same as having you." "No," he said. "It isn't. But it's what I have to offer." He stood. He picked up the coffee cup and, in the natural gesture of someone who does not leave messes behind, carried it to the small side table where the carafe was. Set it down without a sound. The small, automatic tidiness of a person who has spent years in spaces where consideration for others is expressed in exactly this way, quietly, without announcement, in the small practical courtesies that add up to a kind of character. At the door, he paused. "The person who built the trap today," he said. "Gregory Fitch. He wasn't a bad architect. He knew the system well enough to exploit it carefully. You should look at what he had access to and assume it's all compromised. Start from that assumption and work backward. I will, Evelyn said. And the monitoring protocol, he said. The one that lets external traffic ride internal telemetry. That was never in the original design. Someone added it later, and it created the vector. Find out when it was added and who approved it. Was it Fitch? I don't know yet. But you should. He nodded once. He opened the door. Mr. Hayes, she said. He looked back. Thank you, she said. And this time the words were not flat and precise. They were something else, something closer to genuine. He held her gaze for a moment. My daughter thinks fish experience every second more fully than we do, he said. I've been thinking about that all day. Then he went back to the hallway. He left the building at 5:47. The rain had softened to the kind of mist that doesn't require an umbrella, but settles into your hair and on your coat and makes the city look like it's been photographed through a very slightly unfocused lens. He walked to his car in the parking structure and sat for a moment before starting the engine. He thought about the operations center, about the honeypot, the trace, the moment when the trap closed and the attacker went still, on the log monitor a sudden cessation of movement, like a hand caught in a jar. He felt, somewhere in the specific geography of his chest where professional satisfaction used to live, a small and quiet warmth. Not pride, exactly. More like the feeling of a joint moving correctly after a long stiffness, the particular relief of a thing working the way it was meant to. He thought about Marcus Doyle, standing in the center of the operations center with his arms no longer crossed. He thought about Stephanie, who had gone outside without her jacket and stood in the rain on the fire escape and breathed. He thought about the analysts, young and tired and competent, working a problem they had inherited without understanding its full architecture. He thought about Evelyn Carter's office, about the offer, about the way she had listened, really listened. Not waiting for her turn to speak, but actually receiving what he said and adjusting herself to it. She had a good mind. She had the specific quality of someone who knows how to hold complexity without flinching. Running a company like Aurora at her age was not something that happened to people who couldn't do that. She was good. Better than he had expected, though he wasn't sure why he'd expected anything. He had been a facilities worker in her building for 14 months, and she had never looked at him before today, which was correct, which was appropriate, which was exactly the arrangement he had designed for himself. He thought about Gregory Fitch. He hadn't known Gregory well, their time at Aurora hadn't overlapped directly. Greg had joined 2 years after Daniel left, but he had heard the name in the brief period when he'd been rebuilding the system documentation as a contractor before going full facilities. A good architect. Methodical. Careful. The kind of person who understood the elegant interior of a system and respected it. And then, somewhere in the long middle years, something had shifted. Some combination of need, resentment, opportunity. The usual human architecture of a bad decision, not a single moment of corruption, but a slow accumulation of smaller ones, each of which had made the next one easier. Daniel didn't feel superior about it. He felt something more complicated, a kind of recognition. The way you recognize a landscape you have never visited but have seen enough photographs of to know the shape of it. He had made his own series of small decisions after Claire died. Some of them had been right. Some had been ways of hiding. He wasn't always sure which was which. He thought about what he would have said if the answer had been different, if there had been no Lily. If Claire had lived, and they had stayed in Wallingford, and the work had simply been the work without the weight of everything he'd missed attached to it. He didn't let himself stay in that version of things for long. He started the car. The drive to Lily's school took 17 minutes because of rain-related slowdowns on the bridge, and he arrived with 3 minutes to spare, which was still better than the evening last March, when he had been stuck in unexpected gridlock, and arrived 11 minutes late to find Lily sitting on the front steps with her teacher, Miss Alderman, who had the patient expression of someone who had decided not to be worried but was. He had apologized. He had meant it. He had also, that evening, confirmed to himself that the job he was doing was the right job, not because it was always easy, but because it was never 5:47 and he'd already missed it. Lily was standing at the school gate with her backpack, holding a drawing she had made during art class. It was of a fish, a very large fish, rendered in blue crayon, surrounded by what appeared to be small clocks. "Because of what you said this morning," she explained. "About fish experiencing time fully." "I like the clocks," he said. "They're not clocks," she said. "They're seconds. Because the fish has so many seconds." He buckled her in. He looked at the drawing on the dashboard. "Can I keep this?" he asked. She considered. "You can borrow it," she said, with the precise magnanimity of someone who knows the difference. They drove home through the rain. The threat assessment took him 4 nights. He wrote it at the kitchen table after Lily went to sleep in longhand first, which was how he thought, and then typed on his old laptop. He was thorough. He wrote about the structural vulnerability that had allowed the telemetry exploit. Specifically, the addition of the external monitoring relay that someone had grafted onto the original architecture, quietly and without proper documentation, approximately 19 months ago. He wrote about 3 other weaknesses he had identified over the past year from his position in the building's corridors and service spaces, a configuration in the authentication layer that had never been updated from the default, a logging gap in the third-party integration protocols that left a 4-hour window each Sunday morning, a physical network access point in the server room's secondary corridor that had inadequate badge authentication. He wrote about Gregory Fitch, not the man, but the method, the specific technical approach that only someone with intimate knowledge of the original architecture could have developed. He included a section on the audit protocols that should have caught it earlier and didn't, and why. He wrote recommendations, concrete, numbered, ordered by priority. He wrote a reading list for whoever was going to rebuild the architecture from the patched foundation. He included 2 academic papers and 1 unpublished internal document from a conference presentation he had attended in 2014, which he still had in his files because he had kept everything. He included 4 names, people he had worked with before, people he trusted. He sealed it in a plain envelope and left it with Petra Walsh on a Tuesday morning, before his shift began. Petra looked at the envelope. She looked at him. She said nothing, which was, he thought, the correct response. 2 days later, he received an email. "Mr. Hayes, I've read the assessment. It's the most thorough security analysis I've received in 3 years of running this company. I've passed your recommended names to HR and expect to have offers out by end of week. I want you to know that what you did last Thursday materially changed the outcome for this company, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. If you ever change your mind about the offer, any version of it, on any terms, the door is open. Always. E.C." He read it twice. He typed a reply and deleted it, and typed another and deleted that too. He was not good at receiving gratitude gracefully. He had never been. Claire used to laugh at him for it, the way he would deflect, redirect, minimize. "You don't know how to take a compliment," she had said once. "You receive them like they're lost mail addressed to someone else." He ended up writing, "Thank you. The fish drawing is still on my dashboard. D.H." He sent it before he could reconsider. On a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the breach, Evelyn Carter arrived at work to find a new facilities technician working the 32nd floor corridor. She stopped. She looked at the man, young, maybe 26, with the careful, methodical movements of someone taking a new job seriously. He was cleaning the baseboards with the particular attention of someone who has recently been taught the right way to do something and is concentrating on doing it correctly. She watched him for a moment. He didn't notice her. He was focused on the work. She thought about Daniel Hayes. She thought about his stillness, about the way he had sat in her office and spoken about his daughter's nightmares as if they were the most important intelligence briefing he had ever attended, which, she had come to understand, they were. about the way he had diagnosed a kernel panic in 30 seconds while holding a mop, about the way he had built a trap, in real time, under pressure, in the operations center of the company he used to help run, wearing the uniform of a man whose job was to clean the floors. She thought about the afternoon she had stood in the hallway outside the service elevator and looked at his laptop screen, about the tiered network diagram, about the annotations and notation she had only seen used by people with serious formal training, about the feeling which she had not admitted to anyone, including herself, until that moment of standing at the edge of a thing much larger than what was visible, the feeling of looking at an iceberg from the surface and understanding, for the first time, the ratio of what you can see to what you cannot. She thought about the fish drawing he had mentioned. She thought about his description of Lily, the nightmares, the laughter, the morning conversations about how fish experience time. She had built her career on systems, on architecture, on the measurable and the optimizable. She had spent 9 years learning to think about Aurora the way an engineer thinks about infrastructure. Load, capacity, redundancy, failure modes. She had become very good at this. It was, she believed, the right way to run a company that handled the data of 700,000 enterprise clients. But sitting in the parking lot of a school in Tacoma, making sure a child was safely delivered before driving to Seattle to spend the day making sure the floors were clean, that was a different kind of architecture, a different kind of load-bearing, one that did not show up on any org chart she had ever seen. She went to her office. She made herself a coffee. She opened the threat assessment document he had written for her. She had read it 3 times, and was planning to read it again, and she started at the beginning. Outside, Seattle was gray and rainy, the way Seattle often is in November. The leaves on the street below were dark and wet. Somewhere in Tacoma, a man who had once built the foundations of a major technology company was probably making his daughter's lunch, packing it with the same methodical care he applied to everything, the right food, the right note, the right amount. He would be at pickup at 6. He was always at pickup at 6. And in the operations center on the 14th floor, where 4 analysts were now working from a rebuilt security framework with 3 newly hired senior architects, 2 of the 4 names Daniel had recommended, and 1 additional hire that Evelyn had made on her own, the monitors were green across the board. A quiet, steady green, like the color of something healthy, something that had been properly cared for, something built well and reinforced in time, by someone who understood it from the foundation up. The kind of green that is easy to overlook, because the whole point of it is that nothing is happening, unless you built it, unless you knew what it had looked like before, and what it had cost to make it look like this, unless you were the kind of person who understood that the absence of a crisis was not the absence of work, it was, in fact, the highest form of it. Daniel Hayes, in a 2011 Honda somewhere on I-5 South, with a fish drawing on the dashboard and new wiper blades that had finally arrived, would have agreed, though he would have said it differently and more briefly, and probably while making a left turn. Some things don't need explaining. They just need to hold.